Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about it's part of it is an N4 pre-intermediate level grammar expression, but part of it overlaps into more basic stuff. So we're kind of covering some things we've already talked about, and then expanding that out and going into some things we haven't touched on yet. And specifically, we are going to be spending the next 55 minutes talking about mare. And most of you have probably heard of mare before and said, oh yeah, we practiced that. And this is what we've talked about before. What's that other word? It's mare's best friend. That when you see mare in a sentence, you're probably also going to see this other word. Can anyone remember what the other one is? Yes, thank you. It's kara. Kara and mare. And generally speaking, it's often described. What do you often see? Actually, let me ask you. What do you often see kara described as in terms of English? And what about mare as well? Kara and mare are set. What are the two English words? We put them together and say kara and mare means from until. Sometimes until is what's another word for until that we see sometimes in our translations? Any ideas? It's a two-letter word. It's not too many of those. That's fine. Two, yeah, two. So we often see kara and mare translated as from and to. However, I'm often talking about not relying too much on English translations when understanding, especially grammar structures. And so I'd like to step back, and this will help us in today's lesson, talk about what these actually do. And the reason that you hear them as from and until or from and to is because they represent points. And when I say points, I mean points on a line. And this isn't necessarily a physical line, but it's going to be a line or a distance of some kind where kara marks the beginning of that line. Mare marks the end of it. And there's different lines we can be talking about here. We could be talking about a physical location. We could be talking about time, from 6 o'clock until 9 o'clock. There's if you were looking at a timeline, you could drop that line on there, put a kara and the mare to mark the beginnings and ends of it. And you're also going to see one new usage of mare today, talking about a different, kind of the same, but also kind of a different way of using this idea of a line and mare marking the end of that line. So we're not even going to talk about kara today. That's what we talked about before. We're going to focus entirely on mare and its job, not necessarily meaning to or until, but its job in marking the end of some length of time or length of distance or what have you. So let's look at some simple examples that we have here. The first three are ones that we have talked about before, and we might have used to before, but we're going to see until as well here. So let's go through the examples that are on the screen. The first one, we're using time. Oh, and the screen share is not up. Oh, I'm so sorry. This only affects those of you that are here in here in the Discord, but presumably you'd like to see what I'm talking about. So sorry about that. If you're just watching the video, the people in the Discord, are watching my screen share so they can see what you're seeing in the video already. Okay, let's do that again. So we have these examples on the screen. I'll give everyone a few seconds to pop up that screen share if you don't already have it. And I appreciate the person that brought that up. So we have times. Again, this is a timeline from this point in time to this point in time. So until 5 o'clock, for example. There are other types of time. We can talk about that. We can talk about this isn't really a time on a calendar or on a clock, but still a point in time, say, in a person's life. So you could say, 18歳まで. until someone is 18 years old. And this sentence might be used to describe, for example, what someone has to do or can't do, depending on laws. In Japan, you don't have to go to school until you're 18, but for example, in the US, you're expected to graduate high school. And so typically you'd say, 18 made, you have to, attend school. So these two are talking about these timelines that we're discussing. We can also use it, as we've done before, to talk about actual physical lines. Maybe not a line you can see, but a line between two places in space, two physical locations. So you can say 学校まで, until the school or to the school. And then last, now this is one that we haven't used before, but we're going to be focusing on a lot today. You can also use it to describe verbs. 来るまで. Until he, she, they come. And I'd like you to think about this as a time marker. Because when we talk about actions, we talk about when something happens. Is it happening now, in the past, in the future? And if we draw that timeline out, we, for some of you, if you're still going to school, maybe your school starts or the school ends, your first school class ends at, let's say, 9 o'clock. That sounds probably a bit too early, but let's say your class ends at 9. You could use this to describe the end of that class, right? 9時まで. The class is until 9. You could also describe it this way. Chime ga naru made. Now, I didn't put the kanji in here. What does naru mean in this phrase? It does not mean to become. It's not our naru that we see in every other sentence. What is naru in this one? Any ideas? Chime is what it sounds like. It's chime, a chime or a bell. So what's a thing that a bell does? For example, at the end of a class that you think naru could represent? Not to call, but to ring or to sound. So it's something making a sound, like a ringing sound. It's not the same as naku. Naku is used for animals. Like an animal going cheep, 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 cheep. That would be naku. Naru you typically hear with bells or chimes or your phone. Like if your phone's going brrrring, brrrring, or whatever your ringtone happens to be, that would be naru. So both of these are marking a point in time. We're just using a noun for one of them, and we're using an action, a verb, for the other one. Now let's look at a couple of examples. Again, this is half review, but we're mixing in these verbs, so it's a bit of new stuff. We're going to take all of these ones we just saw and we're going to throw them into an actual sentence. So, 店は5時まで開いてます. The store is open until 5 o'clock. Again, we see that timeline in our heads and we see made marking the end of that timeline. And again, this is not required in Japan, but a lot of people do go to high school. And if you go to high school until you were 18, you could say 18まで高校に行った. I went to high school until I was 18. Now, let's look at a couple more examples. And then we're going to practice a little bit and then jump into the harder half of today's lesson. So, 学校まで歩く. Now, this is probably very similar to ones we've done in the past, but we're marking a point in time, or not a point in time, a point in place. And we're saying, oh, I will walk, This one says as far as the school. You could also say I will walk until doesn't quite fit, but probably to. I will walk to the school. And one more example. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's talk about this. No, we'll jump to it. Renju wants me to keep talking about it. So with this one, Made is a bit different in that it's showing this endpoint, but you could go somewhere else. Ni, we often use to talk about the end of a movement action. Gakko ni kimashita. If you gakko ni kimashita, you went to the school and then you're at the school. Not presumably forever, but as far as your movement is concerned, you're done. Made, however, can be used as one step. If you are describing how to get to the station, you might say, for example, I'm going to type this out into the channel. Let's say, are you familiar with Daiso? It's one of my favorite stores in Japan. It's one of the 100 yen stores. You might do something like this. So I might say, oh, you want to go to the station? Well, first, Daiso marite. First, go as far as Daiso. Go to Daiso. Take a right. Turn right. And then, you can continue on with your instructions. However, it would make a bit less sense if you were to say, Daiso ni itte. Take a right and then continue on. That one sounds like, okay, you went to Daiso when you stopped. Oh, wait, now you're going again somewhere else? That one's a bit different. So made can be used to mark the end of all the movement. It can also be used to mark the end of a chunk of movement before your next step along the way. Lastly, we talked about this before. There we go. But we can also use these actions to mark a point in time. So for example, oh, you see someone standing somewhere, and you say, oh, what are you doing? Why are you here? And you might say, Tomodachi ga kuru made matteiru. I'm waiting until my friend or friends come. So this is in the future. So this timeline, we're not sure when this timeline ends, but we're putting an end, we're marking it and saying, when my friends come, there's a little dot on the timeline. That's when I will, that's what I'm waiting for. So in all these cases, we have different ways of taking made and marking the end, of a length of time, a length of distance. And I'm going to show you one more before we practice. This one's actually not in this Renshu lesson, although you'll see it in the Renshu sentences from time to time. You also see this sometimes. Let me type it out for you. You see this sometimes with people. People, or I'm going to say people-esque things, like a store. And you often see it in the sense, again, there's a sense of movement going on. But with this one, you might translate as, please hand this to Michael. Or please bring this. It's not bring, but you might use it with a different verb to say, please bring this to Michael. And I taught in a Japanese school for many years, and I would hear this usage very, very often in business contexts. And you would often hear it used in an announcement or instructions. When you would say, oh, if you have, let's say, we were a high school, and so we would spend a few times each year talking to prospective students and trying to get them to come to our high school. And at the beginning, there might be kind of an information session, and they would say, oh, well, here's all the information about our school. And by the way, if you have any questions about, let's say, if you have any questions about the English department, please, I'm typing it out. There we go. If you have any questions about the English department, Michael made kite kudasai. Now, you probably actually use a much more formal set of words, but we're keeping it simple just so we can see the grammar more clearly. But even in this one, you can see it's not representing, it's kind of a physical space that you're marking the end of, where it's, I wouldn't say stop or wait necessarily, it's just the end of some length that we're talking about. And so I wouldn't link wait to it explicitly. I mean, that does happen, like the sentence that we have, or the sentence we described earlier about going to Daiso before we go somewhere else. But it is, so I wouldn't say stop or wait. I'd focus on end. I think end is a cleaner way to say that, because there's not necessarily a stopping that happens, but there's an end to something, and that's where the made is sitting at. So let's practice just a little bit. We haven't done some practice in a while, so we're going to do that before we continue on to the second half of our lesson. And so I'm going to step back. Let me jump back just a little bit. Okay, to all the different usages that we have, and I'd like to practice this a little bit. Now, when I say practice, most of you know this, but just in case you don't, no one's forced to do this. We have a rather small group today, so I hope lots of people participate, but there's no forced participation. You here in the Discord, if you'd like to type out sentences, we'd love to see your Japanese. Make mistakes, make tons of them. This is the perfect place to make a mistake and get gentle corrections to it, compared to that pressure that you feel when you're in an actual physical classroom and you don't want to say something, because if you make a mistake, you'll feel like everyone's turning around staring at you. No one's watching you today, and so hopefully you'll take this chance to take this grammar, put it into words, even if it's 2 or 3 words. And I promise you, even one sentence, if you make one sentence today, it'll help get you closer to fluency with this, with this grammar expression. So let's talk about our past a little bit. Actually, no, let's not. Yes, let's talk about. And if you don't have a specific sentence you can think of, just make one up. We don't need the truth. We just need you to practice. So let's look at the easier one first. Let's look at locations. Okay. So tell me somewhere that you went, recently. Now, typically we'd use ni in that situation, but today, so we can practice it, we're going to use made. So I'm going to tell you, let's see, where did I go? I went to get some Thai food yesterday, which is kind of hard to find in Japan. But there's one Thai food place we found many years ago. We're in love with it, and so we keep going. So I'd say this. And if I wanted to be a bit more explicit with more detail, I could say, whoops, a bit too much. I could say something like that. 昨日はタイのレストランまで行きました. I went to the Thai restaurant yesterday. I went as far as the Thai restaurant yesterday. So what about you? It can be somewhere. You could use iku. You could talk about how far you ran somewhere, or how far you walked. Oh, I went walking yesterday. Well, how far did you walk? I walked as far as the train station. I walked as far as the school. And again, if you didn't walk yesterday, if you're a robot that doesn't have legs and you're just an AI that's talking to us, then just make up some place that you walked as far as. But tell me somewhere that you went yesterday or recently, and let's use made. I'll give you a minute or two to do this. Now, do keep in mind that kairu, the verb, is typically used to show a return back to your home or residence. And so, if you're living at the store, which is cool, no judgment, then you might say, "Oh yeah, I returned to the store to sleep." Maybe you're hiding out in the tent section. Then that works. That actually reminds me, this kind of shows my age, that there was this movie on American TV many years ago, decades ago, where some teenagers were in a mall and they decided to stick around after the mall closed because they just wanted to have some fun. And apparently, in the movie, this particular mall had security guards, which were robots, which were also killer robots. So the whole movie is surrounded around them trying to get out of this mall with all the doors locked, and these robots are running around trying to kill them because they're in the mall after hours. I have no idea what the movie's called. I just remember it from my childhood. All right, so what do we have? What do we have? So they went to the school, they went to the store, went to the office, went to a whole bunch of different places. Okay, let's change up a little bit. Let's try time a little bit. And we're all from different countries, presumably. I bet there's only about 15 of us today, but I bet there's at least 5 different countries among the people here. So tell us about your country a little bit. And I'm not from Japan, but I'm gonna use Japan as an example just so you can see what kind of sentence I'm going for. Now this isn't 100% true, as I mentioned before. I'm keeping the Japanese simple. Legal, like by law, you have to go to school until you're 15. Now I left out the by law part, or that you have to go. So I'm just keeping it simple and saying in Japan, you go to school until you're 15 years old. And then for us, reading that in parentheses, you have to. After that, it's no longer required, but many people still do. So, tell me about your country. And if someone else types out your country, who cares? If you want to type it out, do the same. Do the same sentence. That's totally okay. But in your country, as far as required education is concerned, until when do you have to go to school? And while people are typing, just in case you're curious, I bet there's at least one person thinking this. Why did I put dewa instead of wa at the beginning of that sentence? Both of them would work. Both of them would work. If I put wa, it's closer to for Japan, or as far as Japan goes, we're considering Japan kind of thing. We're not talking about Japan uh, as a location as much as we're bringing Japan up as a topic and saying, yeah, about Japan, it's until you're 15. The day, however, adds a bit of specificity to it, and you say it's closer to saying in Japan. And then you might say, well, why not just say Nihon de? That might work if Japan was already brought up as a topic earlier, but we are bringing up Japan as a location for our topic. So we're saying in Japan, and then kind of in parentheses, we're going to talk about Japan in Japan, and then we finish the sentence up. So you'll often see this because it makes more sense. We are talking about Japan as a location and not, for example, you know, a political entity. So the person, someone else used America until you're 17 or 18, Philippines until you're 18. The last person went ahead and used the must form, which I don't think we've covered yet, but we will. That you have to attend. I'm saving that for a later day. They're a lot of fun once you get to learn how to use them well, but those double negatives that you need for saying you must do something, you have to do something. The first time you see them, they're very much a punch to the skull. So I don't want to officially mix them in yet, but we'll get to them. They're coming up sooner than later. Apparently in Canada, you have to go until you're 40. That sounds rough, but learning is good. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. We're not going to practice the verb form. We had it in here, but let's just hold on to that because we'll see it a bit more in what's coming up next. So before we start the next section, I want to reiterate what Made is. Now I'm going to use my lovely timeline ASCII art. So if we've got a timeline that's going from A to B, which one does Made represent? This might seem obvious, but I'm just making you think about it so it gets a bit more wedged inside your head. We're talking about a timeline, starts at A, ends at B, and we talk about Made. Which one is Made referring to? B. Now, more important question. Let's look at, I'm going to take the simplest of the sentences that was typed out. I'm going to use the Philippine sentence, and I'm going to copy it in once more. So let's presume that I don't know, but let's presume that the Philippines you start when you're 6 years old. So 6 is when you start school, and 18 is when you finish it. So here we go. I didn't put sai in there for rokusai or juhasai, but I think you get the idea. So if we talk about going to school, how much of that timeline is taken up with this action, going to school? It might sound like a strange question, but you'll see where we're going in just a minute. The timeline goes from 6 to 18, and you say 18歳まで学校に行きます. How much of that timeline is school? See a couple of people typing, so I'm going to see what they say before I jump in with the answer. Oh, they stopped typing. Okay. So, I'm not talking about time at home versus time at school. I'm talking about the general idea of going to school. And it would look like this. This action that we're talking about, going to school, it's happening for the entire period of the timeline. So where the timeline starts, when the timeline ends, this action, gakko ni ikimasu, it's all of it, right? There's no intonation or suggestion that, for example, there's school here, and then there's no school, and then, there's nothing suggesting that it's this. When we say made, we're showing this timeline and saying, okay, this action's happening throughout this timeline, from the beginning to the end. Why am I talking about this? You'll see. So, I tapped the wrong button. Push too fast. All right, let's jump back in. Sorry about that. Let's go. There we go. This is completely new. This is not something we've ever touched about before. Made ni. Made ni looks extremely similar to made, but it means something completely different. And it's often translated as by the time. I like to think of it, its most common usage, not most common, but one of the most common usages is for deadlines. And I'm not necessarily meaning a physical not physical, but a formal deadline, like a work deadline or turning in an application, but just what is a deadline? A deadline is an endpoint. There's our made, an endpoint by which something has to happen. So let's look at some examples, and then we're going to come back to my little timeline and talk about that some more. So, like before, now, because we're talking about timelines, hint, hint, time, we're done with places. We're not talking about places anymore. We're focusing just on time. And like before, you're going to see both nouns being used to represent the time. For example, before we had goji made, that's until 5 o'clock. Now we have goji made ni. And that ni there is saying by 5 o'clock. Suyobi made ni is by Wednesday. And similarly, if we're using a verb or an action, we're still talking about a point on that timeline, but we could say kairu made ni by the time that someone returns. So let's look at some actual sentences, and then we're going to talk about the timeline, and then we're going to practice a little bit, and then we'll be done. So let's look at these one by one. 宿題を5時までに出してください. That sounds like something I said over and over again when I was a teacher. Please turn the homework in by 5 o'clock. Now I'm going to type out one more sentence in the chat so we can do a bit of comparison here. Goji made shukudai o shimashita. Now, the sentence on the page is using turn in the homework, dasu, but for this example, I'm going to use to do homework. Shukudai o shimashita. So, our timeline, now here we don't know what the beginning of the timeline is. We just know the end of it. The end of it is 5 o'clock. So it's some unmentioned, unspoken beginning until 5 o'clock. So for this sentence, the one that's in the chat, it looks like this. Until 5 o'clock, we were doing our homework. We're focusing on that length of time during which the homework is done. Did we finish the homework at 4:30? No. Did we finish it at 2? No. We finished it at 5. However, with made ni, we are no longer talking about a length. We are talking about a point. So, I'm going to redo the timeline. Here's our timeline, our empty timeline. 5 o'clock. So, if we look at the sentence on the screen, 宿題を5時までに出してください. What are some times at which we could turn in the homework? What would be some acceptable times that we could turn the homework in? It could be 5. It could be 4:45. Sure. 4:59? Yeah, I like the way you're thinking. So all of these are acceptable. Now, turning in, often this one is used with an action that you can kind of see as a, kind of a point. So when we talk about made ni, it could be this. And I'm going to use D. I'm going to say D is dasu. So it could be this. It could be way before 5 o'clock. It could be just before 5 o'clock. It could be somewhere in the middle. Who knows? Now, do you see here the contrast between this and made that we had earlier? Made was focusing on the length for which that action was taking place. Made ni is just saying, here's the endpoint, get it done sometime before then. If you can remember these two timeline styles, you can definitely get these. You can definitely get these down. But I tend to not focus on the English so much, then some kind of visual aid to help you, understand this. Made is filling that timeline up with the action. Made ni is dropping the action somewhere on the timeline. Just a little circle, somewhere on there. Okay, let's keep going. Got a few more sentences. 水曜日までに来ます. I or they or someone will come by Wednesday. This sounds like a package getting delivered. And if you are using Amazon Japan and you have the Japanese there, then you'll probably see something like this. Not kimas, but something about being delivered. And they'll usually say, yes, it will be delivered by 5 o'clock today. Is it coming at 5? Probably not. The postal service in Japan is actually pretty good. So if they say by 5, it's probably coming before 5. But it could come at 5, right there. Or this one's using that verb form that we had before. お母さんが帰るまでに掃除しなさい. So by the time mom gets home, or your mother, rather, it could be mom, by the time mom or your mother gets home, clean. Now, if you're the typical kid, you see that as, okay, well, what time is mom coming home? Let me do it just before then. But that's merely a choice that you're making. It could be an hour before mom comes home, 5 hours before, 1 hour before, 1 minute before. And it could be that you did it in a minute. It could be that you did it for 2 hours. Made ni doesn't specify how long something takes or when. It just marks when it needs to be by. So, with this new form, to think of it as a different way, this is now it's hopeful, which I guess fits in with the delivery that we're talking about. It is, or rather, made usually is showing the end of some action. Made ni is showing the end point by which, something should be completed. Because of that, this ties in with the deadline thing. You often see this with requests and commands. Please do it by this point. You can see 2 of our sentences here. One has kudasai, one has shinasai. They're both commands or requests. So I need to step away from the computer for just a minute. So while I'm doing that, I have a request. Please tell me, please choose a time in the future, presumably. It could be next week, next month, a year, and then tell me something you want to do by that time. Something you want to do by that time. So I'm not going to give you the Japanese, but I'll give you my English example. I want to visit Korea by the time I'm 50, for example. So I'll be right back. My apologies for that. I'm back. And so let's work on our Japanese here. And I'm going to put a bit more structure here. So we want to put the time first. We're talking about mare ni. And of course, my keyboard. There we go. This is kind of the core of the sentence that we're looking at. You put the time, whatever the time might be, next month, next year, later today, and then the action. And let's use, you can either use, actually, I like someone just use the want form, tabetai. Someone else is making less a want and more kind of like a promise. They'll say, I'll do the wash or wash the clothes by tomorrow. So we don't know when they're going to do it. We just know they're going to do it by tomorrow. So feel free to use either. If you want to jump and use a bit more complex grammar, you can use some of those must or have to forms. So we haven't learned yet, but you might have. I have to finish this by tomorrow. But at its core, we've got time, the end point, mare ni, and then whatever the action is that you want to do, you will do. What else do we have? You're having a hard time thinking of something, think about your goals in Japanese. And choose, for example, you might say something like this. You might say, by next month, I want to remember 50 kanji. Or 5 or 100, whatever your ambitions might be. If you're taking the JLPT or have aims to take the JLPT, one of the verbs that's often used is to pass. To pass something, to pass a test, pass an exam. And so you might say, by the time you're 20, I want to pass the N3 by the time I'm 20. So to the question, you could use that, although you'd want to change it to not just 18, you'd want to say 18 years old. But sure, and that works fine. You're saying, I don't know when I'm going to go, but I'd like to go sometime between now and when I turn 18. But yeah, that would make perfect sense. It would be a perfectly natural thing to say. And for your, this isn't visit, but rather go to, you would use something like this. 日本に行きたい. But thank you everyone for those of you that put your sentences out to give them a shot. I see a couple more people typing. Please keep typing. Don't let me stop you. But just to kind of wrap things up, we did talk about two things today, and I've tried to say them in a lot of different ways, hoping that one of the different ways of visualizing these will help, stick in your head. But let me type that one more way. Mare is the one we did first, and that marks the end of the action. It is right when the action stops, is mare. Mare ni, it does not focus on the action, it focuses on the period of time within which that action will happen. Mare is action focused, mare ni is period of time focused. Anyway, I hope this helped you. And we do have this lesson inside of Renshu. If you ever need to go back and look at this yourself, just in case you didn't know, if you go into resources and Japanese lessons, they're all in here. Every single lesson that Renshu has and will have, because we're adding new ones every month, they're all in here, and you'll be able to check it out. It's right here, about a third of the way through the N4 materials. So you can check this out whenever you want. You can also take the quiz at the end. And so I hope this helps you out. We'll be continuing with more N4 grammar next time. So I hope that helps you. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. お疲れ様でした。